how's it going? I hope you're doing well. Today, we'll be reviewing a manga I read recently, Uzumaki. First off, what is Uzumaki? Uzumaki is a manga that was created in 1998 by the legendary Junji Ito. For those unfamiliar with Junji Ito's work, he's the author and illustrator behind many influential horror mangas, like Tommy, Gyo, Dissolving Classroom, and many others. Junji Ito's horror, and by extent, Uzumaki's horror, comes from a mix of cosmic and body horror. The term cosmic horror refers to stories such as The Call of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft, where the horror comes from creatures well beyond our comprehension, and where we are reminded of our insignificance in the context of the universe. Body horror, on the other hand, is a more intimate type of horror. The horror comes from within you, since your body goes through changes, a metamorphosis even, and there's nothing you can really do about it. Personally, body horror is something I'm very interested in. If I were to pinpoint where my interest for this subgenre started, it will probably be when I was 7 or 8 years old, and I read Metamorphosis. I was probably too young to read it, but for some reason it was in the kids section at my local book fair. Ever since, I've been very intrigued with body horror, and although I'm more so saddened by the story Metamorphosis than scared, its potential for horror is very apparent. In Uzumaki, the horror side of a Metamorphosis-like story is at its peak. We see how people change into an assortment of different things. We see how they stop being human and become animals, or in some cases, they form vessels that can no longer be called human. The story follows Kiri and Sushi as they discover their town is cursed by spirals. If you haven't read the manga, this premise probably sounds kind of dumb, but once you understand what this curse entails, things start getting horrific. I'll start by talking about some specific chapters here, so if you don't want spoilers, skip to this part of the video. With that out of the way, let's get started. Chapter 1. The Spiral Obsession. In the first chapter, we get introduced to what will be the antagonist for the rest of the story, the spirals. In this chapter, we're introduced to Suji's father, who is obsessed with spirals. He collects everything with a spiral on it. He bathes in bathtubs only when the water is making swirls, and he only eats foods with spirals. Eventually, his obsession becomes so extreme that he himself becomes a spiral. The chapter not only introduces us to the characters and the antagonists, but it also foreshadows a lot of things to come. It highlights snails as an important part of the story. It shows us that people can change into spirals, and it ends with Suji's dad being cremated and spreading the curse to the rest of the town. Now, Chapter 2. The Spiral Obsession, Part 2. In this chapter, we see the consequences of what Suji's father did in the first chapter. We see the curse starting to spread, with its second victim being Suji's mother. I won't say much about this one, because it is one of my favorites, and I don't want to spoil it too much, but it certainly continues to build up suspense as to what's to come. And so, the curse continues, taking victim after victim, and transforming them into spirals-like beings. The first few chapters are all pretty great, and manage to keep the reader interested and intrigued. The next chapter I want to mention is Chapter 8, The Snail. In this chapter, we're introduced to snail people, which are basically humans who were transformed into snails by the spiral curse. For whatever reason, I think this is one of the lesser horrible fates you could have in this story. I mean, I wouldn't mind vibing as a snail, to be honest. Oh wait. Yeah, never mind. Anyway, I just wanted to mention this chapter because snails are having a comeback later and I honestly just like snails. But let's move on to Chapter 10, Mosquitoes, and Chapter 11, The Umbilical Cord. I'll talk about both chapters as a whole since they're more interconnected than the rest. But anyway, the reason I want to bring these chapters up is not because they're particularly irrelevant to the story, but because I think these chapters exemplifies Junji Ito's horror perfectly. Junji Ito has a way to make even the most mundane situations horrific, uncomfortable, and disturbing. These two chapters focus on the spiral's curse effect on pregnancy, and they're the chapters that scared me the most. They're not about something supernatural, like turning into snail, but rather, they tap into a more tangible situation, which just makes it more horrifying. If you don't want to read the whole manga, at least read these two chapters, and if you like them, then you might just like the rest. Moving on to Chapter 12, The Storm. Things just start going crazy after this chapter. This is the breaking point in the story. Before this, the curse has attacked isolated individuals in town, but in this chapter the whole town gets destroyed after a spiral storm appears. This chapter is not one of my favorites, but I considered it was important talking about it, due to its significance it has on the rest of the story. The rest of the book focuses on the main characters trying to survive in town. Since the storm, the whole town devolved into chaos, and everyone is just trying to live. I'll mention some noteworthy things that happened during this time though. Children realize that if they are too loud, they'll create mini hurricanes that will blow people away. we get a new character that joins Kiryu's sushi. Kiryu's brother turns into a snail, and we see more people eating snails. The people who have been living in the row houses together become a single entity, and finally, the whole town becomes a spiral-like maze. Honestly, it's pretty cool to see, but personally, I prefer the more grounded approach the first half of the book had. Regardless, this part of the book manages to keep my attention. I won't spoil the ending, but I think the feeling of hopelessness that it leaves you with is worth reading through the book. So, what are my overall thoughts? I would say that Uzumaki is an incredibly well-written and illustrated novel, with lots of spooky ideas that will keep you up at night. The story structure is not what Western audiences are conventionally used to, and Junji Ito seems to focus a lot more on the scenarios or ideas rather than the characters of his stories. But that's not a negative. I'd recommend checking Uzumaki out. I know I'll be reading another Junji Ito manga soon. So yeah, that's the video. If you like the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. As always, all the stuff I use, like my background music and my avatar, will be linked in the description. Anyway, I hope you're having a good day, and I'll see you guys later, whenever that is.